because we had something else yesterday.
Well, that's good because on Thursday I'm not available.
That's why I scheduled you. I wanted you to share your story. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I work with our education department. And this morning, I'm pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Michele Rodri, a Holocaust survivor from France. Before we begin, I would like to share a few words about the museum. Holocaust Museum LA is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust, and this memorial eventually became Holocaust Museum LA. These survivors who established our museum did so with the mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that our museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward this mission. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Michele Rodri, who will share her story with you. After Michele shares her story, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Those watching on Zoom can use the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can use the comments. And Michele will answer as many questions as possible. Michele has been speaking at our museum for many years now, and before the pandemic, she would speak to school groups. She participated in almost all of our educational programs, and now she's been speaking on Zoom, and I'm honored to welcome Michele to her second public talk that in our Survivor Speaker Series. Michele, thank you so much for being with us this morning and for sharing your story. And you may begin.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your kind introduction. I am very pleased to hear that so many people are available and willing to listen. My story is, I'm going to make it as short as possible. You know, you can't put in an hour or so a life of experience, particularly during the war. Anyway, I was 7 years old when this happened to me. I came from a family of 4 children, 3 brothers, and I was the baby and the only girl. So needless to say that I was very spoiled by my father and mother, and my brothers even more, because I was the baby and they played with me and spoiled me my whole life as long as we were together. I was blessed to be in such a beautiful family. My youngest brother, who was going to school, and usually he would go to high school, he would walk to school. In that particular unfortunate day, he took the subway because it was pouring rain and he was afraid to be late for his class. He took the subway, and it was an unfortunate event that happened. The Nazis came we were invaded already by the Nazis in France. And the Nazis came into the train and asked every man to drop their slacks, their pants, because in those days, most of the people who were circumcised were Jewish children, male children, of course, or sometimes for medical reasons, but mostly because of religious reasons. And also on top of their coat or sweater, we had to wear the Jewish star. And it says across the star, it said Jew, which was very detrimental and very embarrassing sometimes as a child to be stared at your clothing. And not that we were ashamed to be Jewish, in the contrary, but it was offensive. As a child, I remember it was very offensive. I felt like I was branded. Anyway, to come back to the sadness of the day was that my brother was taken. He was 17 years old. He was taken to Auschwitz, an extermination camp. We never heard saw him ever again. He perished in Auschwitz, which was a horrible camp. None of the camps were good, but at the age of 17 and coming from a religious family, I feel that he had a wasted youth because he never went out with a girl on his own. Like I have a grandson, God bless him, who is 22, who has many friends around and has a life. I felt that he didn't have a life, and I must admit that every day of my life I think about him. I have a candle burning for him in his memory every day. I felt that his life was wasted. He was an intelligent young man who wanted to be into science and besides being a very loving brother and son. When this happened, my two brothers who were 14 years, my oldest brother and I had 14 years of difference. They decided to go into the French underground. The French underground was to defend France, and their job was to bomb the trains that came from Germany with the ammunitions. They were working in the French Alps and different places of France. I'm trying to set the scene. I was 7 years old, 7.5 actually, years old, and I was playing outside of my house with 3 of my friends who were not Jewish from school, and I was the only Jewish child, and I had the Star of David on my sweater, and suddenly we were playing hopscotch, and suddenly a truck stopped on the corner of our house, and two German soldiers came out and checked our clothing and saw that I was the only one that had the Star of David. They picked me up and they left my other 3 friends playing because they were Gentiles, they were not Jewish, and they threw me in the truck. When I say threw me, it was literally this. They just picked me up and threw me like a sack of potatoes. And I went, I was in that truck just in shock because a half hour prior to this, I was having, first of all, lunch with my parents in the kitchen. And then a few minutes prior to that, I was playing with my dear friends, hopscotch, all innocent, as all children were. And suddenly I'm finding myself in a truck with a horrible odor of a mixture of ugliness suddenly. And we went, that truck took us to Drancy, which was a triage camp. The triage camp was a camp where every day, or sometimes they skipped a day, they came in and they picked up different people. They decided that these particular people on this aisle will go, and sometimes 2-3 aisles were dispersed and went to different camps. I want to make it clear that I was in a triage camp. It was not an extermination camp. From my camp, they took people to the extermination camps. I was there for 3 months, 3 long months. And I realized very quickly that when the Nazis came in, the SS men mostly came in and took the people usually from the front row. So I made sure that I was hiding in the back. And I was a little girl, so I could just hide underneath a bench or something. And I grew up quickly because I understood that if I was not in the front row, I may not be taken to a camp. And it was so, they didn't pick me up. Also, I have to indicate that my mother spoke several languages as well as my father. And at home, my mother insisted that we speak also German because she was from a place called Krakow, which at the time was Poland. And then the politics changed, so it became Austria at one point. So we spoke what we call Hochdeutsch, which is the literary German. And I'm opening up this parenthesis because it's important in the story. After 3 months that I was there, suddenly I saw my oldest brother coming in with another officer in a German uniform. He spoke a perfect German, and my brother did. And he came over walking towards me with this other SS man, and he looked straight at me and I looked at him, and we didn't wink or anything. I don't even know how it really, in retrospect, how it really happened that I didn't run to him. After all, I was only 7.5 years old, and I didn't see my brother for so long. I wanted to run to him, but I didn't. I had the instinct I knew at that point that it was dangerous for me to acknowledge my brother. And he didn't make a move saying that I was his sister or whatever. He just pointed at me and said and the little girl that was standing next to me, who was only 5.5 years old, who was not even a Jewish child, but she was the daughter of a political prisoner. And she was taken there because the father was against the regime of Hitler, and later on the poor man was shot. So my brother had the presence of mind of taking 2 children instead of 1. Had he just said, I want this child pointing out at me, it would have been quite suspicious, I would have imagined. So he took us out, the 2 of us. My brother took us out with the SS men, going to the car where my brother had a driver with him. The SS men opened up the door for us and said to my brother in German, "Thank you so much for coming," which was quite ironic. And we drove away. My brother didn't speak to me, or I guess he was just stunned that he succeeded in this adventure, which was so risky. We could have all been killed. And he didn't say anything to me until maybe, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half. We were on the road. We were driving towards Grenoble, which is the center of France, quite a distance from Paris. And he turned around to me and he hugged me and he said to me, "I'm going to take you to safety and you'll be fine." And he took us, my little friend and I, her name was Nicole. He took us to a convent near Grenoble. In that convent, the Mother Superior came out to us, and arrangements must have been made before. And she said to me, I will be the only one who knows that you are Jewish. And she said, and I will take care of you, and I will take you to school, and you will be safe here. And I was. She was a wonderful person. And she was just so caring, and she was taking good care of me. She took me every day to school. outside of the convent. Nicole stayed in the convent because she was not Jewish, so she proceeded learning all the Catholicism and everything. And I went to school on the outside. And the Mother Superior came to pick me up every day, took me and picked me up from school, and was really caring for me. I felt very protected. I was there for 13 months. I couldn't make any friends because the Mother Superior said, don't betray your identity. So don't tell anybody that you're Jewish. It would be dangerous. I didn't understand that as a child, being raised in a Jewish home. I didn't understand that I could not talk about my life at home. But I refrained myself because I followed directions and I knew that it was for my safety and most likely for people around me would be safe. So I followed orders. And therefore, I didn't have any friends. I couldn't talk to anybody because when you come into a new class, you want to make friends with the little girl or boy that is sitting next to you. You ask him if he has brothers or sisters or whatever he likes to do. And I couldn't because I was afraid to betray my identity. So consequently, I studied a lot and I became the best student in the class. And just because I was studying all the time and I enjoyed doing it, then I felt safe that way. Then after class, the Mother Superior picked me up, took me back to the convent, and my life continued in the convent with other people, other children that were there. But again, I was the only Jewish child. And after a while, it became very dangerous to remain in that place because the Mother Superior told me that there were a lot of German patrolling the city and the environment of the cities because they were looking for Jewish children that were in hiding in that area. So my brother I don't remember the details of it, but my brother must have most likely arranged for me to go to a family. There were families who took in Jewish children for the right reasons. And there were other families who just took in the children for the money because it was well paid by the families and just did it for that reason. This particular family, I was unlucky, was anti-Semitic, basically. And it did keep me safe. In retrospect, I'm thinking that if it wasn't for her and her husband, for this woman and her husband, I wouldn't be alive. So, but I was mistreated. I was mistreated very badly. I was not given enough food to eat. And there was a lot of food around because it was a farm. And there were orchards with trees and vegetables and everything, and we were limited. Anyway, like I said, they saved my life anyway. It was not done the right way, but it turned out to be okay. I'm here, so. I was there for another 14 months. I don't remember if I was 13 months in the convent or 14 in that place, but at any rate, there was no television, of course, in those days. If you can imagine life without television, the only thing that was there was the radio, and the radio was our only way of knowing what was going on in the world politically. So every day at lunchtime, we were together, the men and the women of the household. My little friend was with me too, and they had two daughters who were not very pleasant, married women who were not very pleasant, who came and joined us many times for lunch. And we were listening to the radio, and all of a sudden, we heard that the Prime Minister of England, who was at the time Winston Churchill, said ironically that Mr. Hitler, because he hated him politically, and he said Mr. Hitler had to capitulate because the American troops are in the outskirts of Paris to liberate France. As long as I live, I will not forget the feeling that I had. I felt like in my spine there was like a cold feeling, like ice feeling, and I couldn't identify why I felt that way. But it was suddenly I realized that I didn't know if my parents were alive or if my brothers were alive. I didn't know anything. I had no contact with them for all these months. And I felt that I was going to be reunited with my family. How many of them, I didn't know. And 3 days later, my parents came to pick me up, my father and mother and my two brothers. Unfortunately, my other brother was not there. And we drove back to Paris and my brother's car with a driver. And I will never forget the sight of the contrast that I had when I was taken to the camp, to the triage camp. We had to drive through the Champs-Élysées, which is one of the most beautiful avenues of Paris. And on all the buildings were draped with flags, with the Nazi flags, which was red, blood red flags from the top of the building to the bottom of the building, with a big swastika in black. And at that time, I felt, as young as I was, I felt that it was a rape to my country. How dare someone walks into my country and just takes over and tells us what to do and what not to do, and take care and just invade us. And it was like a rape, and I understood it was really very bad. Yet, fast forward, when I was driving back home with my parents, I saw the American flags with the French flags draped all over the buildings. The Nazi flags were gone. And the most beautiful sight that I will never forget is having the American tanks rolling down the Champs-Élysées. And these American soldiers were gorgeous. And I was, at that age, I was 10 and a half then. I really appreciated the beauty of these young men. And they was jumping off the tanks and saying, "Where are the Jewish children?" And they would throw juicy fruit gum. Until this day, I eat juicy fruit gum because it reminds me of those particular wonderful moments in my life. And then we came back home, and I was looking for my brother, and his name was Maurice, and I don't remember how. I think I blocked it out, how I found out that he was not coming home ever. And I'm trying sometimes, many times, to search in my brain how I found out, and I must have blocked it off. I continued I went back to school, and I met my three little friends again, continued my studies, and went to high school and everything. And when my second brother decided to go to the United States because he wanted to be a dancer, and he thought that Hollywood was waiting for him, but it wasn't. But he opened up a dancing school here, and he was living here for 10 years. But then he went back to Paris because my dad needed him. But he came periodically to see us. Like every other year, he came and he spent a couple of weeks with us. And then one day he asked my father if he could take his little sister to America to visit the United States. And my father agreed, and I came here, and I thought that that all the United States was Disneyland. It was Wonderland for me. It was wonderful. And that was in 1956. And I've been in this country ever since. I never went back except to visit my parents. I married a man here who coincidentally was also a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. He was from Holland. And we had a wonderful life together for 47 years. And unfortunately, he passed away 16 years ago. I have a beautiful son that is my whole life, and my grandson and my daughter-in-law is just a small nucleus of the family, but just terrific. And I just love to live here. And this is my country for many, many years. So I didn't continue my studies because I felt that I wanted to be an obstetrician, but I felt that when my son was born, I couldn't do both things well, be a student or working or whatever. I was privileged that I could stay home and take care of my son. And I'm grateful for that. And I had a beautiful life here. And this is my story. So if you have questions, don't hesitate. I think, Michael, that I didn't miss anything.
Thank you so much, Michele, for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions, and the first one comes from another Holocaust survivor who was living in Tahoe, and who would like to know when approximately you were in Drancy, and how did your parents survive?
Well, that was really very lucky. My father had a very good friend who was the chief of police in the area where we lived. He was playing table tennis, ping pong, with my dad. They were very close friends. And he was a gentleman, and he came to my father, from what I understand, when I was picked up. He came to my father and he said, "I'm going to help you." And he says, "I think that the only way to help you is to make sure that your house looks like it is not safe to be there." And he barricaded it. And my parents lived in that house the whole time during the war. But they didn't have any electricity because if the Germans were looking at everything. So my parents didn't have any electricity, because if you have a bill coming to the house, then it proves that someone is living there. So after the war, I told my parents, "I think that you had a romantic relationship with candles and everything." I made fun of it, but they survived, and it was great. The man was a righteous man, and I put his name in Yad Vashem for what he did for my parents.
Thank you so much. Do you remember how you found out about your brother's fate?
About Maury, my youngest brother?
About your brother who perished, and
was taken.
Do you remember how you found out?
I didn't find out. I did not. I don't remember how. I really don't. I think I blocked it out at the time because he was the youngest of the three brothers. Therefore, he was closer to me in age. He was like 10 years apart with me, which is a big difference, when you grow up. But I was extremely close to him. And I don't remember at all how I found out.
Thank you so much. Do you remember, going back to when you were in Drancy, do you remember up until the time that your brother saved you, do you remember anybody else trying to help you there, and roughly how long you were there?
I think I was was there about 3 months, but nobody, nobody took care of it. We couldn't take care of each other because each individual was in their own misery, Today I can understand that nobody was caring. They were so shocked, I believe, of the situation. And I think that when you are in a state so disoriented, all these things that come to your mind as an adult, I don't think that you can take care of somebody else. The trauma is so horrible. So, from one moment you're in your comfort zone, and all of a sudden you're totally in shock. You don't know where the rest of your family is going to be. I suppose that this is the reason why nobody reached out to me as a child, But I survived it.
Thank you very much. What were your parents' names and your brothers' names?
My oldest brother was Abel, David, and Maurice. They all had biblical names, and my Jewish name is Miriam, but my French name is Michele. My father's name was Chaim, and my mother's name was Hannah. My mother was not human. She was an absolute angel. My father was a wonderful man, but extremely strict, with lots of love, but very strict.
Thank you. When your brother rescued you, did you ever find out any details as to how he was able to do this?
No, we didn't talk about it. We never spoke about it. I'm sure that he spoke with my parents about it, and the strategy perhaps that they discussed it with my father, who was good in organizing things, but we never discussed it. And years ago, before my brother passed away, my oldest brother passed away, I went to he was an art dealer in Paris, and I went to his office on one of my trips, and I said to him, we were very, very close. I'll open up a parenthesis that he lived in Paris his whole life, and I moved to the States, and every single day we were on the phone together. Every day. He called me or I called him. After his passing, many times I used to call and just to hear the tape that he had on his answering service, which was not healthy for me to do. I don't do this anymore, but he passed away 3 years ago, and 4 years ago, I was in Paris, and I said to him, he was sitting in his gallery writing something, and I said to him, I have to ask you something. I have to tell you something. And he picked up his head and he looked at me and he said, and he always looked at me like in adoration because I was his little sister. And he said, what? And I said, how can I thank you for what you did? I never acknowledged any of it. And he said, what do you mean? I said, during the war that you saved my life. And he looked straight at me and he said, I would die for you. You're my little sister.
Thank you, Michele. I'm glad you shared that because I was going to ask you if you could share that with the audience. Which actually leads me to another question. can you talk about your brothers before the war and things that you remember about them from that time when you, before Nazi Germany invaded France?
Well, our life was, we had a wonderful life and we were a very close family. The immediate family and my father he was part of six brothers. So you can imagine when we had the holidays, everybody came to our house because we had the biggest place to hold everybody, and tables were put together, and it was a lot of noise. It was wonderful, and children running around. My oldest brother was married to a childhood sweetheart, had two sons, and lived very close to my parents, 4 subway stations away in Paris. My brother David never got married because, like I said, he pursued his dream of being a good dancer, and he was dancing like Gene Kelly. He was terrific, and he never got married. He figured that his brother had 2 sons, and then later on I got married and I had 1 son. He said, my brothers and sisters' children are like my own, so he never got married. But he had a very good life. He was happy. What can I say? We were extremely, extremely close. And then when the war broke out, our family was just totally disrupted. The last Seder, which was the Passover meal that we had, we almost had to push out the walls to put members of our family seated. I don't know, I think we were 32 or 34 people. And the next time that we had a Seder, we were 8. So it was a terrible, I mean, tragedy is not even the word to explain what the Holocaust did to all the Jewish families. And our family, it was devastated. I don't know how my parents lived as long as they did. My father passed away, he was 91. And my mother was 85. And I don't know how they survived all these years. I think it was because of the love that my brothers and I gave to my parents and they gave to us, that was sealing the miseries that they overcame. They had to overcome so much. They never complained. I don't understand. My parents, I never heard my parents complaining about anything. They were very special people. I am grateful to be a part of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned the Passover Seder. Can you tell us what you remember about that? And I believe that's when you heard your father say something that had an impact on
Oh
your
yes,
time in the height.
yes. First of all, I was a little devilish with my cousins underneath the table. We were bored at one point because the Seder, the meal goes on forever because my father was leading what we said. He was the head of the family. He was leading the Seder and he was reading from the books and everything. And it was, for us children, we were bored. So we were underneath the table and I was the gang leader between my cousins. And in those days, there was no Velcro at the time. So all the men had shoelaces. So I decided that everybody, all my cousins and I would tie all the shoelaces together with the other people, and then they couldn't get up. If we couldn't leave the table, why should they not? Why should they leave the table? because we were not allowed to leave the table, so we were underneath the table. And then I heard my father, who had a very strong voice, and I promised myself at that time that when I am married and I have a child, I'm going to be very careful what I'm going to say to my child. So he banged his hand on the table and he said, remember that a Jew doesn't kneel. We're not allowed to kneel. And therefore, because my father, whatever my father said to me, it was coming from a religious home. God was first and my father was second. When he said something, it meant a lot to me. So growing up, I kept that in my head. And being in a convent, in hiding, I was supposed to kneel in front of the hotel when I walked by, and I didn't. And then the Mother Superior said, you have to kneel. And I said, no, I won't. And I said, my father said I shouldn't, so I'm not. And the Mother Superior understood, but sometimes I had some little trouble with the other sisters, but it was okay. So I figured that when I have a child, and I'm going to be very careful what I say to him because it sticks in your head forever. So I related that story to my son, and my son said, yes, Mother, you were very careful in saying things to me. So I think he appreciated it. So it was one good thing for a bad one.
Thank you, Michele. And I've always loved the way that you tell that story because it shows that there was just this one thing that your father said in the middle of what was probably the last Seder that you had before the war.
Yeah.
And that it stayed with that one thing stayed with you throughout this time. And I've always
Yes.
really liked it when you shared that story. So thank you. So we do have some more questions. One of our viewers would like to know about your extended family, and you mentioned them a little bit, just that they were there at the Seder, but did you know grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins? What was your extended family like?
My two grandfathers, I never knew. My brothers did know them. My father used to send them, that's what I heard before I was born. My father used to send them on the train for different holidays to spend time with the two grandfathers who happened to be neighbors. And actually, there's a funny story. My youngest brother, he was so smart. My father decided that every Thursday, I think it was Thursday or Friday morning, but before Shabbat, that the three boys had to write a letter to their grandfather, telling them what they were doing during the week and so forth. And Maurice, my youngest brother, didn't know what to write. So what he did, he took carbon paper and he copied one letter and he sent the same letter to the two grandfathers. So the two grandfathers showing off, look what my grandson wrote to me. And the other one saying, this is what my parents told me about it. My other grandfather would say, look what he wrote to me, but it was the same letter, identical, because he carbon copied it, which I think was very smart. But it wasn't the right thing to do, really, in a child's eye, and I thought it was really clever. So my father used to send my three brothers, for holidays to spend a few days with the two grandfathers. So fast forward, my two grandfathers used to come, that was before I was born, to Paris for a certain holiday, spend time in my parents' house. But I understood that later on, because they were Orthodox and they were wearing the payas and what do they call the earlocks, is it? What is it called in English?
Yeah,
Michael?
side locks. Side
Side,
locks.
side
Or
locks. So they were wearing, so when the Polish Revolution, whatever it was, came, they hung my two grandfathers in the square of the town. So I never met them. And I don't know what happened to my grandmothers at the time.
well, thank you for sharing those. And Michelle, I've heard you talk about your family a lot. I have never heard that story about your brother. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Yeah.
Um,
He was, he found always a way to get out of a situation. So.
Thank you. This question here is a little personal, but if you could talk about your faith during this time and how it might have changed or stayed the same or during the Holocaust years.
Well, that's a very good question, because I really think that being raised the way I was raised, which was not, it was an Orthodox environment, but it was not extreme. And I loved the religion of it, the way it was presented to me as a child. I loved it. So I used to talk to God all the time, like he was there with me. And I think that this was a big help in my situation at the time. I had seen my mother before the war. I had seen my mother on Shabbat, on Friday night, when she would light the candles. After she would light the candles and say the prayers, she would always go to the window and pull the drape away and talk to God straight into the heavens. And I asked her once, I said, "Why do you do that, Mommy?" And she said, "I feel closer that way to God." So maybe, not maybe, but I'm sure that I got that from my mom. I liked it. It made me comfortable. It gave me a warm feeling. I still do that. Sometimes I'm sitting in my car driving and talking to God, and I'm saying, I know it's not the right place, but it's better here than nothing. I have conversations with what's around me. It gives me a lot of comfort.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Can you talk about your husband and about a little bit about his background?
My husband was an only child. He lost his mom at the age of 30 to cancer in Amsterdam. And therefore he lived with his father. His father was in the diamond industry. And his father had 6 brothers. And when my husband's mother passed away, one of the brothers took my husband in during the day so that he wouldn't be alone when he came home from school. And then the brothers were together and they raised him that way until the war broke out. And when the war broke out, everybody was taken. The Jewish section of Amsterdam, there was a big razzia, from what I understand, because the Germans had no problem getting all the Jews in Amsterdam, because what happened in 1500, it's quite interesting that in 1500, when the Jews were thrown out of Spain, the Dutch decided in the Inquisition to open the doors to the Jewish community and to ask them if they want to live in Holland, they're welcome. They can do anything they want, open up businesses or whatever, but with one condition is that they don't try to convert people into Judaism, which we don't do. As a rule, we don't do that. So what happened is that everyone who came from Spain, and my husband's family came from Spain, they wrote their name in the registrar of the police registrar, and right next to it they had to put their religion. So when Hitler walked in, he went to the registrar and took all the Jews to the camps. Very, very few Jews escaped. He was among 90 children that were taken from Amsterdam to Bergen-Belsen. First they went to Westerbork, and then they went to Bergen-Belsen, and he was there and survived Bergen-Belsen. But his father didn't. His father was taken with him in the same razzia, and his father didn't. And like I said, his father had 6 brothers and 1 sister, I think. But I'm sure they had 6 brothers. Nobody came back. Everybody was gone. He was an only child. So when we got married, he found a wonderful family, because my parents, my brothers loved them. They had a very good relationship. My mother came here after my dad passed away. My mother came here, and if you can imagine a son-in-law who took my mother's passport away and said, "I don't know, Mom, where the passport is. You have to stay with us." And she stayed for 3 years instead of 3 months. He wouldn't let her go back to Paris. He loved her so much. So the relationship was just phenomenal.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Going back to your brothers, which ones of them were in the resistance, and do you know any details about their work with the resistance?
Well, my 2 brothers, my oldest brother decided to go into the resistance, and he didn't even ask David, my second brother. He said to him, "You're coming with me." And David and Abel were very, very close. The 3 brothers very close. And he said, "Sure." So they went together. My oldest brother had been, when the war broke out, 2 years already in med school. He wanted to be a surgeon. So he was in the part of the medical corps at one time in the resistance. You know, when there was a bullet to be removed or something, he could do it even though he wasn't licensed or anything. But, you know, in an emergency, you do what you have to do. And David wanted to be with him, and their job was to blow up the trains coming from Germany with ammunitions to France. So they blew up the trains over the mountains in the Alps, and another place in the middle, in the central part of France, they were in the Bourganeuf, which was in the Creuse, the center part of France, very active with the Maquis, which was the French resistance. It was the resistance under the leadership of General de Gaulle, who became later on the president of France, but he was the leader of the French underground.
Thank you very much. Since your parents survived and you were so young, growing up, was this something that you ever discussed with them?
I can't say that we had big discussions about it, because my parents were very positive people. And how they survived the fact that they lost so many members in the family and their son, and the parents being in such a bad situation. We talked about, but not in details, or maybe, I don't remember very well that time, or maybe they made sure that I was not present when they would discuss it, because I think that they knew how traumatized I was from the situation, being away from my parents, being a spoiled little girl and thrown in with total strangers. It was my father used to say it was a miracle that I was not crazy, that I was a normal person. Because all of a sudden, I didn't do anything in my house. I didn't make up my bed as a child. I didn't, if there was a plate in front of me, I wouldn't take it to the kitchen, to the sink or whatever. I didn't do anything. I was so spoiled. My father used to say, don't wash a dish because you're going to ruin your hands, when I was a little girl. I was really spoiled in every way. So they didn't talk about these things, not that I remember. I would remember if it was something important, but it wasn't. They didn't talk about it. Perhaps they talked among themselves before I was in the house,
Thank you very much. Sort of a related question. Do you remember the moment that your family reunited after liberation?
Do I remember when my parents came to pick me up?
Yeah, when your family reunited, you and your parents and your brothers.
Oh, I remember that very well, because my mother had a chronic bronchitis. So the doctor had prescribed to her in the French pharmacies, you could buy cigarettes that were made out of eucalyptus leaves. They smelled very good. And my mother was smoking this when she felt that she was getting an asthma attack. It was very, very, seems crazy for a cigarette to do this, but it was strictly eucalyptus leaves. So when my parents came to pick me up, I remember my mother was so excited to see me, and my father couldn't stop crying. I remember that. And my mother couldn't stop holding me tight. I couldn't breathe. And she couldn't believe that I was, and she would feel me up if all my members were together. I remember that. And then she was smoking the cigarette, and she threw out a cigarette that was still lit, I suppose. And in the back of the car was a pillow, and the pillow caught on fire. I remember, and we had to stop. That's all I remember. Then we drove to Paris.
Thank you very much. And the friend you mentioned, who was with you at the beginning of all of this, did she survive, and how?
Oh, we were
and if
friends
so,
forever.
how long did you?
We were friends forever. She married. After the war, I don't know how it happened. It's a bit confused in my head, but after the war, she was reunited with her mother. Her father was shot because he was a political prisoner. So she was, and she went to Canada, and she married a Canadian officer. Later on in life, she married a Canadian officer, and she became an oral surgeon. We were in touch with each other. I went to her wedding in Canada. We were in touch all the time. And then unfortunately, she passed away about 25 years ago from cancer. So that stopped the relationship. But she was a very nice, she grew up to be a very, very caring person, a nice person. She wanted to convert to Judaism, and I talked her out of it. I said, you have enough troubles. You don't have to do that.
Thank you for sharing this. Would you, if you had, do you have any advice for anybody who is going through some sort of dark time or some kind of trauma, has some sort of trauma in their past? What sort of advice would you say to somebody in that situation?
Well, I have one philosophy. I've had a lot of trouble in my life, and after the war, even after the war, and the last few years, losing parents and my husband and everything. And I had some medical problems, but thank God I'm doing well. So I have one philosophy. First of all, if you see something that somebody is doing that is not right, you must speak up. It's a must. As a human being, you must speak up, and this is what I feel. I'm not telling you what to do, but this is what I feel. Because I feel that if you keep quiet and you see that this thing is wrong, like not treating another person right, and if you don't do anything about it, you are as guilty as the predator. In my book, you are guilty as the predator, because you have the will to do the right thing and you have the will to do the wrong thing. So choose to do the right thing. Put yourself in the other person's place and try to do the right thing. It's not always easy, but you can do it if you want to. And I have my own philosophy, is that if I am put against the wall, I cannot back up, so I have to go forward. And that's what I'm teaching my children too. And they know to do that. I hope that they do.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And one of our viewers actually has a question for me. He would like to know, he watches our weekly Survivor talks, and he would like to know what I find most special about you, Michelle. He says he can tell that I know your story well, which I do. And I would like to say that I have known Michelle. I've been working at the museum for 6 years, working closely with our survivor community. This is it's been such a tremendous honor to work with our whole survivor community. And Michelle, I find your story so unique that because you always emphasize how closely knit your family was before the war, and of course, despite the tragedy that you all experienced, you all remained so close afterwards. And I've always really appreciated the fact that you share this story about your brother just a few years before he died, which was, I think this might have happened about 5 years ago, when you thanked him for saving you when he said, "I would die for you." And I think, to me, this is what stands out about your story, that despite everything you went through, you were such a close family before and after the war, and that I can tell that you value the memory of your family so much, the way that it's the main emphasis of everything you tell, every time you tell your story. And so it's one of the things that makes it so special to hear from you. But most of all, we should all feel so honored to have the experience to listen to a Holocaust survivor share their testimonies as long as we can. And so that's why we thank you so much, and of course our whole survivor community for doing the same.
But I have to say something, Michael. You're right that I am happy to say that I live by the values that my parents taught me. I do. I have to. This is my guideline. So thank you so much, Michael, for your kind words and your friendship. You have a special spot in my heart.
And you as well. On ear oi.
Thank you.
Michelle and I also
Thank
speak
you.
Yiddish together. Um, and yes, this is also what I was referring to. You always say that your parents really shaped your life.
Yes.
So
Yes.
on this note, I'll have the concluding question is why do you share this story and why have you made it such a priority to share your story? You like speaking to high school students in particular, even though we have a mixed audience today, but what do you hope people take away from your story?
Well, I don't. I'm not a hero. I'm just a human being that went through these challenges, and I thank God that I am able to talk about it because I feel that it is important for students to know, for young people to learn about it, that the world is not all made out of sugar and everything is beautiful, that they have to appreciate their lives and do good for others. It's important to do for others too. That I feel that it is important to make a better world. You have to be kind to other people. And there's too much nastiness going on, among people. It's not right. And it upsets me a lot personally. So I'm doing it also because my daughter-in-law, God bless her, was pushing me all the time. She said, "You have to tell the story. You have to tell the story." And then my grandson asked me once about the Holocaust. He came home from school and so asked his father. My son asked him, "Dad, my son said, what did you learn today in school?" And he says, "What is the Holocaust?" And then he said, "Ask your grandmother. She knows all about it." And this is how it started. And many times he came to my talks, many times. And every time he was so elated that the audience were paying attention. He liked that. He said, "They're learning something just like I did learn." So I feel that it's important that the word goes out, that it wasn't a story made up. This is the truth, what happened to us and to humanity. I mean, it's unheard of to hurt another person because you don't feel the same way they do. So that's all I can say. I suppose that I'm doing it because in memory of the 6 million who cannot speak and tell the story.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And that's why we as a museum do what we do as well. So we
Right.
thank you again for sharing your story. And I would like to let you know that you had viewers from all over, but somebody was tuning in from Australia listening to you this
Oh,
morning.
wow.
So thank you. So this is a benefit of Zoom and being able to do this. We can reach a really wide audience. So
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you to our
Thank
audience
you.
and for all your questions. Wishing you Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos, wishing everyone a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. Please
Yes.
continue to follow our website to learn about our virtual programs and all of our other public programs and talks that we have. Um, Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you again to our
Thank you.
audience. And we will resume our public survivor talks next week. This week was an anomaly, but next week they will resume on Thursday. So thank you very much, everybody.
Great.